Giants, wyverns and worms.
Spectral hounds, hairy hands and witches.
These isles are filled to the bursting with odd, uncanny places with a tale to tell.
In fact, we reckon that you're never more than a few miles away from a good bit of weird folk.
In this pod, we're on a mission to find the weirdest folk tales in Britain, the most bizarre, shocking and chilling stories etched out in the odd corners of the country where legends thrive.
But it's not just a mission, it's a competition. Who can tell the weirdest tale? I'm Sam.
And I'm Nikki.
And this is Weird Folk.
Welcome to the very first episode of Weird Folk, the folklore podcast where two storytellers go head to head with two very different retellings of the same folk tale. One of the magical things about folk is that it's been told and retold throughout the centuries, shared from one generation to another in pretty much a constant stream.
If you can't tell already, we're sisters as well as storytellers, and we've been recounting folk tales to each other ever since we were kids. But we can never decide whose retelling is the best. So we've decided to share our stories with you and let you decide which one's going to take the crown.
So each week we'll be asking you to vote on which version of the tale you enjoyed the most, and we'll put up a poll on our social media for you to vote. And the writer with the most votes that week wins the crown.
So the stakes are high.
Yeah, indeed they are. So let's get going with episode 1, The Legend of the Wryd Stones. When we sat down to talk about this pod and the kinds of stories we might tell for you, there was only ever really one contender for this first episode. For me, this is the tone setter, the tale that sums up everything this pod is about. Ill-fated meetings, the hubris of fatal ambition, magical metamorphosis, and, most importantly, an angry enchantress. I am, of course, talking about the legend of the King's Men, or the Wryd Stones. Lots of you might already be aware of how the stone circle at Longcompton in North Oxfordshire came to exist, but just in case you don't know, here's the rundown. A king, whether local or not, it's really never clear, meets a witch on top of the hill that overlooks Longcompton, and for some reason that witch takes offence to the king and his men and transforms them into stone, obviously as you do. And the men turn into a lovely stone circle, and the king into a lonely standing stone in what is now an opposite field on the opposite side of quite a fast B road. Further down the field with the stone circle in it, there is also a collection of leaning stones known locally as the Whispering Knights.
It's a story too good to resist because it offers us as storytellers the chance to ask, why did the witch turn them into stone? Was it betrayal, revenge, sacrifice? To the curious mind, there's a lot there that we can kind of dig into.
Yeah, I feel like one of the things that I love about this story, one of the reasons why I wanted to start with it, is there is that real space of a question of just what would drive somebody to such a terrible punishment. It's not like, I'm going to turn you in for, to the police. I'm going to, I even think that, it's a fate worse than death. So why did she go for it? And I think there has to be something deep behind it, which I think we've both gone for in our retellings.
Is it a fate worse than death? Does stone think?
I don't know. Do they know that they've been turned to stone? These are all big questions. I don't think we've addressed that last one in our story, so we're just going to leave it alone. But we're going to start today with my retelling, because this is my episode. So next week you take your turn.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So we're going to start today with my imagining of what led to this terrible metamorphosis. I think knowing me, it kind of makes sense as a choice. So we're going to start with the sorceress's sacrifice. Like all good folk tales, no one really knows when this story came into being or who first told this tale. So for the purposes of my story, we're not going to worry exactly about when this happened. It could be 2, 3, even 4,000 years ago. There are a couple of really important elements, though, that we can't do without, and one of them is that everything starts at sunrise. A girl sits in a tall oak on a smooth hilltop, hidden by the lush canopy as the first signs of sun make dark silhouettes of the hills. A breeze ruffles the leaves, prickling her skin with goosebumps and shaking her twig-tangled hair. Her small round face, with its river-green eyes and unsmiling mouth, remains pointed towards the western brow of the hill. The intensity of the gaze alone would make the average man run for his life. In fact, it is difficult to look at her without the word witch bubbling up unbidden. To keep her mind focused, she flexes against the rough bark of the tree and tries not to think about the little house in the valley below where her sisters doze in untroubled sleep. If everything goes to plan, then they would all be safe from the men who lurk in the dark. As if in answer to this thought, sounds begin to rise from just beyond the eastern lip of the hill, the clanking of metal and the murmur of many voices. They are awake. He is coming. Now for the tricky part. Long minutes pass. Her soul twitches in anticipation. She blinks, and suddenly a tall, straight figure is striding over the grass with his cloak billowing out behind him like a golden standard. Ranged along the ridge, a large group of men in rough armour stand sentinel. The girl tries not to look at them. Her invitation had been clear. Just the king, no others. After a few strides, the king stops to regard the sparse hilltop with an eagle-like frown. Perhaps this is meant to make him look important to the casual viewer, or perhaps it is a natural reaction to the touch of the wind on his cheeks. Whatever it may be, the combination of haughty demeanour and the way his richly embroidered cloak flies in the breeze certainly does create a striking image. A golden torque sits heavily above the fastening of his cloak, announcing his status to the world. From the safety of the oak, the girl watches the king intently, as though trying to read his mind. But there is nothing to read on that well-schooled countenance except arrogance. She allows herself a little smirk of pleasure, but she doesn't act until the sun finally breaks the horizon, briefly throwing spears of blinding light into the eyes of the king, forcing him and his men to turn their gaze. The moment is short, but it is the chance the girl has been waiting for so patiently. As lithe as a snake, she is down the tree and creeping stealthily, but swiftly, across the neat furrows. She only has seconds, but she knows her business. When the first shock of light fades, the king turns back to find a figure standing before him. The girl, the witch, is etched in streaming shafts of gold. Her outline is a contrast of light and dark that robs her of her human features. Her ragged clothes are whipped into a frenzied dance by the rising wind. She may not be tall, or have a magnificent cloak of gold thread, but glorified by the light of the newly risen sun, she radiates unearthly power. It's an old trick, but still a good one. To the ignorant, it could look like magic. The men on the ridge mutter in amazement, but you don't become king by being too easily impressed. His stern frown is only fleetingly replaced by a flicker of surprise. I have come, witch. Do as you promised, and make me High King of all Britain. The king's voice booms across the valley. He bows his head slightly, almost imperceptibly, the very smallest token of respect. The golden figure remains silent for a space of time. The wind blows, the grasses rattle, and the shreds of tattered dress dance and snap. Sun, stone, stake, a king of Britain I can make. The high, girlish voice whispers into the wind. Truly? The king steps forward eagerly. I didn't really believe it could be done. How? Stick, stone, sun, 7 strides thou shalt take, and if Long Compton thou shalt see, King of Britain thou shalt be. The witch whispers into the wind so faintly that the king steps forward to catch her words. His brows are pinched together. What does that mean? He barks. What's Long Compton? Is this a metaphor? The girl, who has been holding her dread place for so long that her arms ache, gives a tiny, barely audible sigh. He would have to be one of the stupid ones. Take 7 strides across the hilltop, no more, no less, and if you can see the village at the bottom of the valley, then you'll be King of Britain. The mystical whisper has been replaced by a tone so sharp it could cut flesh. Oblivious to this, the king rubs his hands together. 7 strides. Easy. If I'd known it was this simple, I'd have come this way months ago, instead of thrashing around in Wessex. Still, not too late. If this helps me take Mercia, then I'll have enough hidage to persuade the Menicians that I mean business and... Be warned! The witch girl booms. You must now move before the sun has risen completely, otherwise the magic won't work. Oh, what? Oh yes, good point. Very well. Do I start here? He lifts his foot to begin with the confidence of somebody who hasn't heard the word no recently. There's a muttering from the men on the ridge. Those with sharp ears have caught the gist of the deal and are trying to pass it on to their comrades in the huddled circle. Yes, 7 strides from this point, the Wish Girl orders. She is creeping backwards, so the space between them widens. And which way is Longcompton? He demands, scanning the grass ridge again. This time the Witch Girl merely points towards the eastern side of the hill. The king turns to the men behind him with a laughing cry. 7 strides to be king of all Britain. They cheer in response, although some wear a worried frown. 1, cries the king, stretching his legs to take an enormous first stride. The Witch Girl creeps alongside at him at a distance. 2, he roars. The ground is sloping down now, but he doesn't seem to notice. 3, yell the warriors on the ridge. Even the ones who are frowning have joined in. Their king is halfway to the side of the hill and still has 4 strides left. 4, the ground dips again. 5, the Witch Girl stops and watches him follow the path she'd planned for him. 6, the king's smile begins to falter. The summit of the hill is wider than it seems. As he moves into the 7th stride, a false horizon appears, another mound of grass which completely blocks his view of the village below. Infamy! He roars as he thumps down his foot for the 7th stride. He turns to glare at the Witch Girl. This is a trick! You tricked me! From the ridge, his men roar their disapproval. Hands grope for swords. The king lumbers forward, his hand on his dagger, and in doing so, picks up his foot to take an 8th and fatal stride. Immediately he, and every single one of his warriors, finds his limbs as unmovable as the earth beneath their feet. That was a trick, but this is not. The girl's green eyes flash as she raises her arms to the sky to seal the spell. Stick, stack, stock. As Longcompton thou canst see, then king of Britain thou shalt not be. Rise up, stick, and stand still, stone, for king of Britain thou shalt be none. Thou and thy men hoar-stone shall be, and I myself an elden tree. She leans in to hiss at him. No more bloodshed in the name of glory. My people deserve better than you. With this, she plucks a sharp elder twig from her hair and plunges it into his face. The moment the tip touches his skin, he begins to change, melting and merging like molten wax, his limbs fusing, his clothes hardening, his hair calcifying, until everything is smooth stone. On the ridge, the men in their defensive circle suffer the same rocky metamorphosis, their swords abandoned at their feet, as they are gripped by a power they cannot fight. When it is over, the king, now as upright and proud in death as he was in life, stands alone. His men, a newly minted megalith to his vanity and arrogance, guard him from afar. The Witch Girl gives herself a moment to inspect her work, and then, her powers nearly spent, she plants her feet to the ground and stretches her arms to the sky again. One drawn breath, one smile, one sigh, and she is gone. In her place stands a glorious elder tree. Right. Oh, thank you. So yeah, that's the Sorceress's Sacrifice. As you can see, I think I hinted at earlier, I have gone for, I don't know, retribution, revenge, one of the R's.
I mean, it's full teen witch, and teenagers are always about the revenge.
Yeah, no, I mean, and you also know that I'm a big fan of witches in general, but also this kind of like reclaim the witch from the terrible slurs cast on her by like Christian societies. I genuinely feel like in these older folklore stories that witches are quite often representing the powerless, or they're representing like just resistance against these kings that seem to be just rocking around Britain taking whatever they like.
Well, they tend to go either way, don't they? Because you get a lot of in the north of England they called them Sibylline women, didn't they? Which was kind of post Greek Roman nomenclature, which is very much about like wise women or people that were representative of fortune and prediction and prophecy.
Yeah.
So that's sort of one side of the witch that we see, which is this kind of prophetic mistress of the earth.
Yeah, the reference to Sybil, who was the
the oracles, the Delphine oracles, and so on.
And there's that whole thing about like oracle and fortune telling kind of turning on the person that does it. And I think there is a lot of that about it, but I think there is a lot of like just mistreatment of the witch. And I like the idea of the witch coming in and kind of like protecting or looking after her people, especially in a way that is kind of drawing on a power that is something from the land rather than something that is kind of like physical strength or like force of arms or something like that. Because one of the gaps that are in this story is we don't know why she does it. And I think quite often traditionally it's been seen as she's done it for kind of evil reasons, like evil witch. You had no reason to turn those people into stone. But I sympathise with her. There's quite a few people I've wanted to turn into stone over time if I could have. So I just have to point out as well that I did use, there is that stick, stack, stock, stick, stack, stone spell formula. I have borrowed for the purposes of this story from a poem, I think, that is associated with the stones. I could not find any attribution of an author for that. I think it's quite old, but it's kind of traditionally associated with the Rollright stones. It's printed on the lovely plaque that is in front of the King's Stone.
Yeah, you can go read it.
Yeah. And I mean, I would encourage anybody to go read it. It's one of my favourite places to go. It's very atmospheric. I think
It's wonderful at solstice. Winter, I mean, winter's on the winter solstice on the way, and that I'll be up there for a bit of an ease up with the pagans, because they always put on a good showing.
A good showing. And that's one of the things about the Rollrights is they're so accessible compared to... I mean, I think there are actually a lot of kind of like Neolithic sites that are more accessible but probably lesser known than, I don't know, the big hitters like Stonehenge, which is fabulous. And like Stonehenge obviously is fantastic. But some of the ones where you can go to by yourself, it feels like you shouldn't be allowed to wander around them. A bit like, oh, should I be here?
It's like going up to the top of Bella Snap, something like that.
Oh yeah, Bella Snap's a great one. So yeah. Anyway, so that was my story, which I could talk about all day. Please vote for me. But Samantha is going to give you her version of the story. What is this called?
So this is called Stone Hearts. And this is much more, I would say, of a...
Romance?
It's not necessarily of romance. It's not necessarily romance. I'm quite fascinated with power and how that plays into people, which you'll hear a lot in this story, and we'll talk about a little bit after.
Oh, so I'm interested to listen. Okay, Sam, take it away with your story.
He's tired, weary all the way down to the marrow of his bones. The march he began more seasons ago now than he cares to count was never meant to do more than secure his borders. Now those same borders stretch across half the land, and if the knights whispering their greed at his back have their way, soon they'll be bound only by the sea. Power is a trap, a web of dreams and lies, and the more he claims, the deeper it binds him in chains of pride and duty, chains that weigh so heavy it's a wonder he can still carry the sword that guarantees his dominion. His hip aches at the thought, a souvenir from his first battle. Compton lies beyond the hill, King, a proud upstart reminds him when he calls a halt, as if he cannot read the curve of the rolling fields or swooping dance of the swifts that shriek overhead. He pushes past the man with a sneer, eager now for the sight of the familiar. Even aching, his feet remember the paths of his boyhood. It's as if he never strayed south in pursuit of adventure and fortune, as if he has come home, ready to fulfill long-forgotten promises. And perhaps, in a way, he has. He takes a deep breath to savour the crisp air. It carries a hint of wood smoke from freshly lit morning fires and the scent of rich, fertile earth that makes this place such a prize. An army could eat well for a week off the harvest, waiting for whatever paltry lordling claims the land to ride out against them. His eyes skim the lush greenery stretching across the valley. How many years will pass before it's green again after it's watered in blood and iron? A sickening feeling clenches in his belly. Emotions he'd long believed buried suddenly rise. How can he consider himself a righteous man when he has become the conqueror? The alarmed trill of a blackbird from the hedges startles his frozen reverie. He glances aside by instinct and then can't look away. "Well, you certainly are a sight," she says. There's a lifetime between them, but when she steps from the dappled shade of the trees, all he can see is the hazel of her eyes, filled with the same warmth and soft resignation as the day she watched him leave. his love, his witch. It was time, he murmurs, drinking in the lines on her brow and smattering of silver shot through the curls of her dark hair. They're tamed now, no longer as wild as they once were, and that knowledge rests heavy in his heart. How much he has missed them, missed her. Time, she laughs, a derisive huff. Her gaze lands on the armed men gathered behind him, or some other purpose. He feels indignant heat rise in his face, as if he's returned to the uncertainty of boyhood. She always did see through him. You do not welcome me, he asks, perhaps a little sharper than he should. I do not welcome armies come to ruin me and mine and all that I hold dear. Her eyes are harder now, their warmth shuttered, but it's her words that pain him the most. Ye have a family then? He hadn't expected her to wait for him, not after the first few seasons as he pushed each opportunity to return inside in favour of grander pursuits, and yet he cannot help the way the knowledge discomforts him. She would have made a fine lady had she been raised from her country rags. A son, she says, as if it should not wound him, though he's a man grown now, nearly 22 with a child of his own on the way. For a moment it's as if she's stolen the very air from his lungs. Her jaw sets stubbornly, fiercely. There can be no recriminations. He knows the fault of ignorance lays firmly at his feet. But what man, what king does not desire an heir? The sick churn he'd pushed down returns, bitter bile rising. There's an army at his back, one whose greedy quest he can barely constrain. The knights are already restless. If he commands that they leave, he cannot guarantee their oaths of allegiance will hold. That thread of his authority may well break. He doesn't know how to speak his fears. He'll lose his son on the same day he's learned he's a father. She knows them anyway, she always did. There's an old magic, but I do not have the strength alone. It requires sacrifice. Anything, he nods. And when she smiles, his fears fall away. How strange that all the greatness and fortune he's amassed pales in comparison to that smile and the knowledge that beyond the hill his blood beats in another's veins. She takes a knife from her pocket. One of his men startles. King! Stay back, he snarls. His witch works quickly, carving a mark into his palm and her own. She speaks a word he doesn't understand. A strange chill rises. I wish to see him before, he says. Just one glance will do, one taste of immortality. 7 steps to the top of the hill, love. She presses a kiss to his bloody palm and lets go. He can see the beginning of change in her, a fluttering pattern of leaves under her skin. Neither of them will be spared, he realises with fierce regret, but he cannot stop his climb. 1 step, 2. His legs grow heavy, he sees panic begin to run through his men as a pale mist sweeps across them. His knights gather, their swords freed from their sheaths. 3 steps, 4. Soldiers twist and flail, their flesh hardening. They shout, but their legs no longer obey. 5 steps, 6. Branches sprout from her back and shoulders, unfurling new life. The knights no longer stand as men, but as rocks huddled in their last conspiring whispers. 7 steps, then Compton, where a young man cuts wood outside a small house, pausing to steal a kiss from a pretty woman who brings him water. The king uses the last of his strength to twist, to gaze upon his love, her delicate leaves inviting berries and winding roots. This, he realises, is true power. The legacies longed for all his life made real in this last moment of sacrifice. A cold wind blows through the valley that morning. The people of Compton think little of it until the shepherds return with strange news. A circle of stones now stands in the field on the hill. A boulder too, one of them interjects, almost overlooking the village with a full-grown elder tree beside it. Just appeared out of nowhere. Strangest thing I ever saw. Amongst the crowd, a young man feels the secret his mother shared before she departed that morning weigh heavy in his chest. One day, he thinks, he will make sure their story is told.
Wow. So that was really, really good. I mean, I hate to admit that because this is a competition, but I like the way that you have made that kind of so empathetic and atmospheric and that kind of motivator, of love really is really lovely.
I think it's one of those things where a lot of people go to find their fortune
Yes.
and find a way of being and then try and return to their roots. And that's sort of what I wanted to channel a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, and like again, like it's only natural that some of these kings are kind of moving around for they're just really kind of, you know, warband leaders, aren't they? You know, kind of trying to climb their way up through a society that really values the force of arms, that really values kind of what you can carve out for yourself. I mean, there's all sorts of examples of that in kind of the Anglo-Saxon period. I think so much so that one of the monks writing at the time, Gildas, like makes a list of why they're all terrible people. So like, yeah, I love that. Gildas's list of why he hates everybody. But I think one of the things that is interesting about this entire story is like I think mine is much more about her motivations, where yours is much more about his. So like why turn up and like, you know, do what you need to do? What's he looking for? And there is that sense of like immortality. But I like that you kind of touched on that. That was
and he sort of does
nice.
achieve it in two ways, right? He ends up he's a stone, which it's not immortal, but it's certainly thousands of years old now. And then you've also got the kind of that idea that he's immortal because of the passing of a bloodline. Yes,
yeah, and there's lots of different ways to kind of think about that immortality. And if you think about kind of it's interesting because like if he's an Anglo-Saxon king, there is no guarantee is there that your direct child is going to be take over from you, because they did that whole thing with Aelflings whereby you could be a family member but it wasn't necessarily your son. It was whatever family member was considered to be the best at battle, most powerful, most influential by, you know, all of the people around you.
That's if we think this is an Anglo-Saxon story. I mean, it might not be.
Well, this is like I pointed out, it could be 2, 3, 4,000 years ago. Who knows how old this story is? I think one of the earliest, well, like I said about the kind of piece of poetry that kind of I've used as a jumping off point for mine, that is like unknown author. It's so old. And I think one of the earliest depictions of the Rollright stones is on a tapestry that is at one of the local houses. It escapes my brain now which one it is, but there is a tiny Rollright stones kind of mapped out on this large kind of tapestry.
Was it somebody else trying to count them?
I think it was somebody else. Oh yeah, because they are famously uncountable, although apparently there are 77.
I don't know. I've never managed to count them the same twice.
Well, I mean, there is a reason why you can't count them.
Because I'll set them free. And suddenly there'll be a Neolithic army out to get everyone.
Well, there are all sorts of legends about how the Rollright stones on specific days of the year will come alive again and dance around in a circle. I mean, I don't know why they
feel like Morris men made that up.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know.
To hide evil deeds.
And there's also a great story as well about how a farmer once kind of dug up one of the Rollrights because it looked like an ideal way to bridge a stream that he had. And apparently everybody who tried to cross that stream using that stone fell into the water. So eventually, it took them 3 days to drag it down. Like the horse kept breaking a shoe and the cartwheel kept breaking, and they got it down there and it was just terribly bad luck. So they brought it back, but it only took them half a day to get it back up the hill because it wanted to go home, I think. So
was it one of the Whispering Knights or was it one of the circle stones that he...
I cannot remember that detail right now. I think it might be one of the Whispering Knights.
Because, I mean, those are burial stones. So that's extra creepy.
Yeah, that does feel like bad luck. And I mean, do you know what? The Whispering Knights is such a... Like, the whole place conjures the imagination. I can see why writers like Penelope Lively were so inspired by it. Like, I used to love that book, The Whispering Knights. And even though the witch is the bad guy in that story, I mean, I can't go into that now, but, like, I... Obviously...
You've got a hankering for witches.
Yeah, well, not just a hankering for witches, but, like, in The Whispering Knights, it's... Arthur's sister, isn't it? May.
Mab, you mean?
Mab, yes. Who's the...
well, they use the spell from Macbeth, don't they?
Yes, the kids use the spell from Macbeth, but they accidentally call her up. Mm-hmm. And I think she is kind of often associated with, like, I think, this kind of really negative attitude of, like, if there was a King Arthur, then he was right at the cusp of the Christianization of Britain, and his attitude is kind of Celtic religions by the kind of Christianization of the country, and she becomes this bad guy, but at the same sense she's like defending cultural practices that have been around for thousands of years.
It's Morgana Le Fay.
That's it, Morgana Le Fay. I always get the
Queen Mab and Morgana,
The three sisters of the Orkneys, and also my brain is not working very well today. Should probably do better show notes. I don't know. We will for next time. because this is a lot
Less booze?
You're probably less booze. This is the kind of stuff that we kind of sit around and talk about anyway. I mean, well, later on we'll talk about in different episodes. We'll dedicate a whole episode into how I don't hate King Arthur, but like I don't really.
She really does.
I just prefer the witches.
She hates King Arthur.
No,
just tell it. Just admit it.
No, just the knights. I love Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So
yeah, but that's because that's not really an Arthurian story. That was just lumped together.
No, I mean, yes, yeah. I mean, all of these things have different roots. I think we're going to get ourselves into a lot of trouble if we continue down this road. Yeah. So the roll rights we chose because it is a beginning. We are going to go on a longer journey in which we're going to take in all sorts of different areas and locations. So we hope you're going to join us for our next story, which is going to be about Leap Castle, which is one I didn't know very well.
Yeah, it's one of my favourites. Supposedly one of the most haunted places in Ireland. I think there's probably quite a few that give it a run for its money. But yeah, wonderful, creepy location with a very rich history. We're specifically going to be looking at one part of it because there are so many ghosts and so many different stories behind it.
Actually hundreds. When I went in to do my research for my story, I was like, where do I start? Yeah. There are so many, like, you know, there's the Red Chapel that has lots of things. There's a whole
oubliette with 150 bodies in.
Okay, so like we'll leave all of that for the episode, but we are very specifically we're not gonna tell you which bit yet, but it is Leap Castle. Gonna focus on like one narrow thing. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to go to our website, which is weirdfolkpod.com. Remember, the pod, it's not just Weird Folk, it's weirdfolkpod.com. And you can follow us on Instagram, where we're going to put up our poll. So come and vote. Are you team retribution or team romance? I think is the way that we are kind of framing that this week. So every week there's going to be a choice. I'm not going to say vote for me again because that feels a bit desperate, but vote for me. So we
vote for her. It's fine. I don't care. I have the satisfaction of having written the writing.
Yeah. Anyway, we are going to see you next week with our Leap Castle episode. Until then, continue writing weird. You have been listening to Weird Folk. Weird Folk is written and edited by Nikki Watson and Sam Moody. Our theme song is Dominion of the Sword, as performed by the brilliant Melrose Quartet, arrangement by the legendary Martin Carthy. Our cover art is by the wonderful Kate Unwin at the Moon on Furrow. Keep writing weird.